This is the first of a series that we are beginning called Understanding the Edges, centered on deconstructing homelessness, both broadly and here locally in our community in the Charleston area. For those who don't know me, my name is Christopher Jardin. I am the liaison and homelessness coordinator with the City of Charleston. This initiative was birthed from the Mayor's Commission on Homelessness and Affordable Housing, which was launched by Mayor John Tecklenburg of the City of Charleston in 2016, in response to a recognition that, again, homelessness is not just any one municipality or any one agency or any one individual's responsibility, but is really, again, a collective responsibility of a community. And so this commission is comprised of a diverse array of stakeholders from across the community, with representation from Charleston, North Charleston, Mount Pleasant, and Somerville, really working to, again, take a comprehensive look at issues related to homelessness and affordable housing, and take a collaborative approach, because that truly is the only way that we'll be able to tackle, again, many of these, again, complex issues. So this series is really, again, deconstructing the narratives that we've heard around homelessness. Even as service providers or as community members, I think oftentimes we have a certain narrative in our minds as to what homelessness looks like that's been informed by a whole variety of different sort of avenues via media, the news, et cetera, and so forth. But when you think about homelessness as a concept, we have to remind ourselves that what we're actually talking about are individuals with unique backgrounds and stories and histories and experiences. And again, an individual's narrative can't possibly fit within, completely within a broad narrative. Again, this looks so many different ways to so many different people. And so a major thrust of this series of conversations is going to be centered on, again, really challenging us to think about why we think the things that we do, to maybe dispel some of the ideas that we maybe have around homelessness that we don't even realize we have. But even further than that, again, this is really going to hopefully inspire us to think about ways that we can take a more active role in working towards meeting the needs of the folks in our community. I think oftentimes we have a desire to be a positive impact and a positive change in the places that we live, but we sometimes don't know the tools or the resources that we need in order to be able to sort of implement that change. So on one hand, we're hoping to, again, challenge our preconceived notions. And on the other hand, we're looking to, again, inspire again, those who view this to think about ways that they can be more active in, again, meeting everyone in their community. So with us tonight, and who will be hosting the conversation is Pastor Rebecca Wicker. Pastor Rebecca is the Associate Pastor for Outreach and Evangelism with St. Matthew's Lutheran Church, just in downtown Charleston. Welcome, Pastor Rebecca. And being interviewed is Otha Meadows, and I will just give you a bit of background on Otha Meadows before I hand it over to them. But Otha Meadows' career combines service in the for-profit and not-for-profit sector. He assumed his current position as president and CEO of the Charleston Trident Urban League in May of 2006. Before joining the Charleston Trident Urban League, Mr. Meadows served as the executive vice president and chief operating officer for the Indianapolis Urban League. While there, he was instrumental in designing and introducing many new and innovative programs to the Indianapolis community. These programs included the Diversity and Race Relations Institute, a national recognized career tracks workforce model, reentry initiatives for men and women, and the largest HIV/AIDS program in the state of Indiana, serving African American and Hispanic underserved populations. Prior to going to Indianapolis, he worked for the Columbus Urban League in the position of executive vice president for the Center for Change and Leadership. While there, he spearheaded many research projects in collaboration with the Ohio State University, the Ohio Data User Center, and the Regional Census Bureau. He designed and helped implement an extensive research project conducted in collaboration with the Franklin County United Way, A Matter of Race, that helped to address political, social, economic policies and created disparities in poor and minority communities in central Ohio. He's worked with the Medical University of South Carolina on developing a model for community-based participatory research, supported by the National Institute of Health and the South Carolina Education Oversight Committee. And he currently serves on the board for the Mayor's Task Force for Homelessness and Affordable Housing for the City of Charleston, the Charleston Local Development Corporation, and the Charleston Redevelopment Corporation. So again, Otha obviously comes to us tonight with a whole host of a variety of experiences and background. And we're excited to hear again what he has to share with us. A little bit of housekeeping before I hand it over. Again, all of your audio and video turned off, but feel free to use the chat to type in comments or questions. We'll run till about 8 or so, and then hopefully have some time at the end for a Q&A, wherein we will wrap up at 8:30. So without further ado, take it away, Pastor Rebecca.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you, Otha, for joining us here this evening. We're glad to have you here to be the one to kick off this web series, and we're glad to have you with us.
It's my pleasure to be here, but Murphy's Law, been using Zoom meetings all day and my computer goes on the blank. But the main thing is that I'm here and I'm looking forward to having the conversation with not only yourself, but all the people that are on the call.
Yeah, thank you. So just to kick it off, so you work with, you're working with Charleston Trident Urban League. Tell us about the programs that you have and give us some overview of the work that you do with them.
Yeah, absolutely. The Charleston Urban League, we do work primarily in 4 areas. Those areas are housing, employment, asset building, and strengthening families. And I think the important question to ask or to understand is, why is it that we do work in those areas? Just to give you an example, we feel it's important to do work as it relates to housing, specifically related to first-time home buyers. When you look at the equity in home ownership, we feel that that's incredibly important as it relates to giving families the kind of foundation that they need to do well in this society. But when you look at the fact that over 80% of whites in this community own homes and less than 40% of African Americans and Hispanics own homes, I think that is an indication of why it is that we do work in that area. The other area that we do work in is asset building. We have one of the largest free tax preparation programs in the state of South Carolina. Why do we do that work? Well, the fact of the matter is that in the Charleston metropolitan statistical area, we have the highest refund anticipated loan rates in the country. That means that we have lots of people who are going to alternative financial institutions to do their banking and to get their taxes prepared and paying exorbitant rates. Also understand that why it's important that we do work in that area is that 1/3 of the people in South Carolina are unbanked or underbanked. That means that they do not have a relationship with a first-tier bank or financial institution. The other area that we do work in is employment. It goes without saying, if you don't have a good job that pays a decent wage, it will have a definite impact on how well you go and grow in our community, not only in our community, but in the society. And so what we try to do here with our employment program is to not only help people, but also understand the skills that they need to retain employment and to build on those skills to not only get higher paying jobs, but also to get what we feel are necessarily called living wages, where they are not needing to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And the other area that we're doing work in is strengthening families. That's where we do the homeless prevention work. That's where we do the financial assistance, providing those individuals with the supports that they need to keep shelter and a roof over their head. And so most importantly, at the end of the day, we are the fair housing counseling agency for the southeastern region of the state here. And what that is that we do a lot of landlord-tenant mediations, and we also investigate potential cases of discrimination and refer those cases to the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission, or to HUD. And so that's kind of the wheelhouse, if you will, of the work that we do here at the Urban League.
Golly, it's staggering, and it covers so many different areas and systems. And it sounds like it also requires a huge, broad understanding of so many different sides of society, really.
Well, yeah, I think it's important that we all understand that everything is connected. When we talk about homelessness, we can also talk about the direct impact that employment has on that. We can also talk about the lack of education, or the point of education has on on homelessness. We can talk about how the lack of skills and assets have an impact on homelessness. And so when you look at all of those areas, they're all connected, and we can all relate them to the things that go well in our lives or the things that don't go well in our lives.
In looking at what could lead to homelessness, what could be factored into homelessness, what do you think are some of the greatest misconceptions that people often have around homelessness?
I think the biggest misperception that people have about homelessness is that it can't happen to them. When you look, especially now, at what's going on with COVID-19, if you will just look back 30, 60, 90 days ago, there were people in this community who never thought that they would be in this position. But here they are, at the front door, if you will, at the gate of potentially being homeless. We have an affordability crisis on top of that. We have people who work 2, 3 jobs just to pay the bills. And we need to understand that before the pandemic, people were struggling. Families were struggling. And so the biggest misperception is that people, I think, feel that it can't happen to them. And I think that the reality is that here we are. And we need to also understand that what contributes to that. What contributes to that are the things that we just talked about. Low income, low wages. When you talk about the not having contingencies, not having credit, not having relationships with financial institutions, all of those things lend to the fragility of our households, and definitely connect to the reasons why potentially people become homeless. But I think most importantly, what we need to understand, that the undergirding factor that we can attribute to homelessness, not only in our community, but the nation, is poverty. And until we address the issue of poverty, we are going to have continue to have very serious issues as it relates to homelessness.
Yeah. And I think, even speaking from where we sit on Marion Square, we're also seeing that change too with COVID-19, and people discovering just how easy it is to fall into a place of facing homelessness as well. Yeah. As much as we see people suddenly going through or perhaps going through those that road that leads to homelessness, and how that could be sort of an overturning of life, from the other direction, when you work with individuals and work with families in your line of work, what is the transformation that you hope for those individuals when you go about this work?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to do is, in order to get people to understand the situation that they're faced with, is I think that we have to impart some knowledge and provide information on how they need to navigate these systems, or these social systems that can be very complex, especially for people who've never experienced them. The other thing that I think is critically important is that we are able to provide some type of service in a more holistic way. Let me just give you this example.
Mm-hmm.
We will have a person who will come through the door and say, listen, I need assistance for homelessness. But if we don't look into the reasons of why they are experiencing or potentially experiencing homelessness, if we're not able to assess, is it lack of employment? Is it a low wage job? Is it a family stress? Is it addictions? If we're not able to really assess some of those things, I think that we are missing the mark in a large way. And so the other part of it is that we need to ask more of the clients that we're serving. I don't have a problem in asking someone who comes to the Urban League, who is looking for a service or assistance. What are you bringing to the table? And I think what we need to do is we need to ask, or we need to engage clients in a more in-depth way, because I think when we do that, we're asking them to invest in their own solution in health and well-being. And I think that we get a different kind of response from the client when we challenge them to do that.
Yeah. So it sounds like it starts with a very honest, eye-opening phase to take stock of the situation when you start out with a client.
In order to come up with the best possible solutions for anyone or any situation, you have to have the most honest and accurate information. And so you absolutely have to start there. There's no sugarcoating anything that we're doing, especially at this point in time, especially especially with what's going on with the pandemic. I think that people who were, or families that were fragile before, are even more fragile, and they are at breaking points, if you will, and understanding what it is that their future holds and what potentially can happen to offset the serious implications of potentially becoming homeless.
And then there's also this this engagement, this asking the family or asking the individual to be a part of the solution. It sounds like great accountability and buy-in on that part too as well.
Well, you know, it's amazing, and you know, I've been doing this for a little bit, okay, but it's amazing when you challenge individuals to identify what their resources are. And when you do that, they are able a lot of times to identify resources that they've never ever thought existed. And when you start talking about, well, you know, what's your support system look like? Where can you get this kind of help from family member A, B? You know, when you actually challenge individuals, they're able a lot of times to come up with, you know, some of the things needed or some of the resources needed to help their situation. You know, I think that, I say this all the time, we do wonderful work, not only the Urban League, but all the other organizations in this community. But I think that we need to understand that we can't be more concerned about a person's situation than they are. It doesn't, you know, we can't be invested in their care and well-being 75%, and they're only invested in it 25%. That's not the deal. What we understand that we may have to provide some assistance, financial, other types of social service assistance, but in terms of the mindset, we need to ask people to engage in a different way and really bring potentially something, whatever it is. It just creates a different synergy and buy-in in terms of not only what we're trying to do, but ultimately what it is that we're needing to do to help them in the most effective and positive way.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, absolutely. So in looking at this working with individuals, working with families, walking this path with them, where do you think the greatest obstacles lie? What gets in the way of that transformation?
I think what gets in the way of the transformation is the not dealing with reality part of it. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think that the reality or what gets in the way is that when people are in a situation such as homelessness,
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of people resign themselves to the feeling
Mm-hmm.
that this is the bottom of the barrel. There is no way out. There is no. This is the end of the road in essence for me, and I think that that kind of thinking kind of gets in the way. I think we internalize that to a degree,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that what it does, it clouds our ability to understand what are the steps that we need to take to change that situation. One of the things that I think that we have to do as service providers is that we need to educate those folk in our community on how to navigate, as we talked about before, to get to organization A, B, C, and to let them know what types of services and resources are available to them. I think that in our community of service providers, we are very aware of that. But in terms of how we push that out to the broader community and let them know where those services are, where they exist, and how they can get to them, I think that we can do a better job in helping people potentially overcome the dire situation that they're in as it relates to potentially becoming homeless or losing their shelter.
Yeah. So for an average citizen, say someone who just really they haven't engaged the topic, they haven't been a part of the conversation, but they're hearing about this, or they see people on the streets who are homeless, and they wonder, what ways would you imagine engaging those folks, and what are the biggest things that you would want them to know right off the bat about homelessness?
One of the things that I used to say was that, when it came to homelessness, we had blinders on.
Mm.
And we used to have our office on King Street, and we had a lot of people who came by the Urban League, or we were able to see them out on the street, and I think, and I used to see the cars going back and forth to downtown, and I used to say that we don't see the homeless people because we don't look to the left or to the right. But if we simply look to the left or to the right, we would see the homeless. But what I say now is this, to those people who don't understand what we're talking about here, or the importance of what we're talking about is here. With what's going on right now, I would ask everyone to take a look in the mirror, because when they look in the mirror, they are potentially going to see not only themselves, but I think a lot of other people in the situations that they're dealing with right now with the pandemic are going to be the face of homelessness. So we don't have to look to the left necessarily. We don't have to look to the right. I think a lot of us are in essence going to have to look in the mirror, and that potentially will, unfortunately, be the face of homelessness as we go through this thing.
That's powerful, because like you said earlier, we don't imagine it happening to us, but it very well could, and that's a powerful look at it as well.
Well, One of the things that we have to do is we have to heighten our sensitivity. You know, we do hard work, and it's not easy, but I think sometimes we kind of put labels on folk, and we have a tendency to say those other people or the people across the track in that sense. What we need to do is, I think, we're working hard, but we're going to have to work harder. And ramp up our sensitivity and understand that, you know, people right now have a heightened, sense of what's happening in their lives. And so we're going to have to heighten our sensitivity in terms of how we serve them. And I just think that as service providers, we're needing to understand that. And I would ask that we all think about that a little bit, because sometimes I think we're a little too insensitive to the folk that we're charged to serve.
So switching gears a bit, so you've worked in Indianapolis and Columbus, so you have perspective of being in different communities and now in Charleston. So, and you carry, I would assume you carry that with you as well, but having worked in Charleston, where do you think that service providers do work very well? And then where do you think there is room for improvement and growth in the work that we do as service providers?
Okay, let me just make some comparisons here. Columbus, Ohio, the number and the top 5 giving cities in the country in terms of, you know, philanthropy. When you look at Indianapolis, Indiana, you've got the Lilly Endowment, which is a $40 billion endowment. And so, you know, then you look at the Urban League here in Charleston. And so, you know, when you talk about homelessness, when you talk about disparities as it relates to race, when you talk about unemployment, when you talk about education, when you talk about housing, the same problems that exist in those cities are the same problems that we're challenged with here. But the difference is the scale. The reason that I mentioned those cities and the work that we did there is that what they were able to do is they were able to provide a ton of resources to these issues. I think here, we don't have that kind of resource, so it's going to require us to work better, more collaboratively, more effectively. And, you know, and at the end of the day, it really comes down to resources, putting the appropriate resources to do the work that needs to be done so that we can, at the end of the day, say that we've moved the needle or made a difference. And so, you know, all the resources in the world, they're not going to solve our problems overnight, but we need to be able to effectively apply them and work together so that we can get the most, if you will, bang out of the buck and help as many people as we can.
Absolutely. You also mentioned disparities in populations, particularly around race. In your work, how do you see a person's skin color, race, factoring into issues of homelessness and housing?
It's absolutely a factor, and let's be honest here. Let's look at the study that was done by the Eviction Lab, where they talked about the city of North Charleston having the highest eviction rates in the country. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, the thing is, when you look at the top 5 cities that had the highest eviction rates, Richmond, Virginia, and the other cities after that, the common denominator to those eviction rates in was the fact that disproportionately those persons were African American.
Mhm.
And so, we get back to the point of what I talked about earlier, the disparities.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, when you look at the fact that we talked about the income gap, uh, white Americans in this community, uh, median income is $80-some thousand a year. African Americans' median income is a little less than $40,000 a year. When you look at incarceration rates, African Americans make up 13% of the population, but represent 50% of those people that are incarcerated. When you look at the fact that African Americans are denied 4-to-1 at the bank for loans, when you look at the fact that you have African Americans who have the same qualifications as their white counterparts, but receive less pay. And so, I can go on and on and on. The point that we need to make here is the fact that we need to acknowledge that there's a system of racism, and it disproportionately impacts people of color. I don't know if any of you know about a guy called Andrew Hacker. Andrew Hacker wrote a book, Separate, Hostile, and Unequal. I bought Andrew Hacker to do a presentation in Columbus, Ohio, years ago. What people were taken aback who had never heard of him was that he was a white guy. And he was a white guy who had written this book, and he talked about the inequality, the disparity based on race. And so, the fact of the matter is we just need to acknowledge it. It exists. And if we don't address it, we will never make progress on all those things that determine how well you do in the society that we call America.
Right. And it comes back to a prior theme we touched on in honest truth telling. And I think being able to hear and face that truth that racism is among us, and it is very much a force that is at work in all these systems that your work is looking at addressing around education, around asset building, around employment, and around housing as well. So it seems to me that it comes full circle back into the very areas that you're working to address in your organization as well.
Yeah, as we talked about, they're all connected. But we I think understand what the problems are to a comfortable degree. I think what we need to focus on is, what are the solutions? And I think one of the things that we need to do, and I applaud the work that Chris and others are doing, we need to, in my honest opinion, come up with an agenda for excellence in our community. And that's just, my spin on it. How excellent do we want our community to be? And what are the things that we need to do? We are not going to agree on everything, but what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that we can agree on that we can all get behind and work towards? And if we can do that, I think that we can really look at making substantive change. We cannot afford at this point to have the conversation and the dialogue and revert back to the status quo.
Mhm.
At this point in time, we cannot do that because we have a tendency, we'll feel emotional about the situations that's going on in our community.
Mhm.
We will speak about, how, um, you know, uh, unjust and unfair it is. But a month later, we're kind of back doing the same old thing.
Mhm.
And I encourage us to
Mhm.
let's take this moment in time with
Mhm.
all that's going wrong and all the pain and all the suffering that's going on in our community. Let us, as service providers, as leadership, uh, uh, come together and come up with an agenda of how excellent we want our community to be. It doesn't have to be how excellent we want our community to be. It could be how great, whatever that is. But the bottom line is, let us use the mindset and the talent that we have in this community to work more collectively to identify what those agenda steps are and the strategies that we need to take to accomplish some of this. And I just encourage us to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like it's not just taking it in and listening and saying we've had this listening, but now taking it to a point of setting a common goal and challenging a community to actually act on that goal, that vision of excellence. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. We can Zoom meetings ourselves to death. Okay. And believe me, I believe in structure and foundation. But at some point, I think it goes without saying.
Mm-hmm.
We have to move beyond the dialogue, and we have to roll our sleeves up and start getting the work done.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at, and I would ask everyone, if we got into a room and ask, okay, are you satisfied with where we are?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not satisfied with where we are, what do you recommend or what do you suggest in terms of how we should get there or where we need to go?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the steps we need to take to get there? And then say, okay, let's just do it. The commercial, let's just do it. All I'm saying is that let us move beyond the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And get and move the needle and start doing not only we're already working hard, as I say, but working harder because our community need as much as we have to give and more at this point in time.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness this Zoom is being recorded so that we can have your vision on record, Otha. Yeah. But in looking,
I'm sure we got some critics out there, but everybody's got an opinion, right?
yeah. But in looking at this vision that you talk about, this vision of excellence, the transformation in the community, in your work, in people that you have worked with, in places where you've seen develop, where do you see signs of this come out? Where have you caught glimpses or caught visions, or could share stories of this happening, this transformation?
I've got a great one for you.
Okay.
We had a lady about a week ago,
Mm-hmm.
actually a week and a half ago, who came to us for assistance.
Mm-hmm.
She had lost her job due to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I was contacted by USA Today, and they wanted to do a story on evictions. And when the story came out, the reporter from the USA Today contacted me and said, hey, Otha, listen, do you have a client that I can talk to? And I said, yeah, I got this person, and I gave him the person's name. He contacted her, and And he wrote about her in USA Today. A day after the article came out, I got a call. And it was a guy who had read the story in USA Today. And he said, Otha, he said, I read about your quote and the person in USA Today. He said, I want to pay her rent for the next year. And so that tells you that there are good people in this world. And those are the kind of people that will step up and that we need to engage to help us do the work that we're doing. We can't do it all. We've got, but we've got thousands and thousands of people out there like that. We just need to let them know, and we need to engage them that they can contribute to the well-being of people in need in our society and our community. And I just think that's a great example of exactly that.
Wow. Yeah. So just really bringing the person out there that wants to do the good in relationship with the person who can benefit from the good, for sure.
Yeah, well, you know what they say, if you never ask, you will never receive. And I think that there are lots of people in our community who want to do something, but I think it's important for us to show them how and the way they can support the work that we do as organizations and agencies, but also how it is that they can directly be involved in the solutions to the problems that we're needing to address each and every day. And so I just think that we need to look at how we effectively, create opportunities for individuals to do that.
Over the time that you've done your work, where have you seen maybe ongoing themes that have stayed the same, and where have you seen developments or shifts in the way that we approach homelessness?
Well, unfortunately, I've not seen a lot of change. Unfortunately, I see the disparities that we talk about continuing to exist and continuing to grow. I'm a statistical guy, and and for many years, as Chris indicated on my bio, I did a lot of work with research and the Data Usage Center at the Ohio State University and some others. And what it's, when you look at the two major reports that's been done by the federal government, called the Kerner Commission report in the late 60s. And then you look 30 years later at the Millennium Breach report. And what those reports said was this. They said that unless America, and when we talk about America, we're talking about our community, because we're part of this thing called America, that unless we address the gaps in the haves versus the have-nots, we will never, ever solve the issues of inequality in socially or economically in America. And so when you see what's going on now, those inequalities, they continue to exist, they continue to grow. And so I don't want to say that there's no hope, but I think that it requires us to understand the magnitude of what we're dealing with. And it requires us to understand that the solutions to these issues require some heavy lifting. And so we can do as much as we can with the resources. As I say, I think that we've done a great job with collectively coming together and working more closely on addressing homelessness. I think that's obviously and definitely a step in the right direction. But we are needing to apply the same kind of energy to all those other areas because, as I said before, they're all connected. And we can't look at homelessness just in a vacuum. I know that that is our focus. However, I think that we need to look at all the other things or the other areas socially and economically that impact homelessness if it is that we're going to have the best opportunity to come up with the appropriate solutions for them.
Yeah, it's definitely a systemic approach. There's no small Band-Aid. My observation whenever I've done my work is that you sort of tug on one factor and then it starts tugging on other factors and other issues and other pieces of a puzzle. And I wonder if people that are maybe new to this or just starting to engage the topic around homelessness, maybe they get overwhelmed by just how vast this network stretches in terms of what needs to be addressed. I wonder if there's that factor that plays in.
I really can't say, but individually how people respond to it. But I think that it can be overwhelming. However, we often use the word systemic. So in my opinion, systemic, problems require systemic solutions. And so to that point, I say this, as service providers, we have to look at, I'll frame it this way, look at whether we're being reactive or proactive. Okay, are we reacting to what's happening immediately, or are we looking at what we're needing to do long-term down the road? And so I think that is where I can preference this as in a way as being as what we're needing to do to come up with systemic solutions, not addressing only what's happening immediately, but being able to come up with the appropriate policy and the appropriate strategies in terms of how we offset and eliminate these problems going forward. And I that's just my sense about that.
Well, and in that vein of a proactive approach and maybe a proactive area of work, that seems to also speak to advocacy work. And where do you see the most effective work in terms of advocacy? Do you see that around as well?
Well, I think that we all have to be advocates. We all have to be ambassadors for the work that needs to be done. But I think in order to do that, that requires us to, again, collectively, come together and say, okay, what is our advocacy message? Are we saying the same thing? Are we advocating for the same things? How do we, in essence, impact or affect policy? Who's going to do this and who's going to do this and who's going to do that in terms of who's going to be responsible for the parts of the initiative that we need to do that we need to have to change the narrative. And so, again, we are all advocates. I think that we can have, some specific responsibilities in terms of exactly who stands at the podium and makes the speech, but in terms of, as we go through, our day-to-day, and we're asking for resources, we're asking for financial support, we're asking for funders to support the work that we do. we all have to be advocates. But also, I think we need to have some very, very good policy initiatives, where it is that we can drop the document on a legislator's desk or a policymaker's desk and say, okay, this is our strategy, this is our plan, this is what we needing to do, and we're in accord on what that looks like and how we do that. And so I think that, to be in accord and in lockstep as it relates to an advocacy or policy issue or initiative, rather, I think is critically important.
And that seems to come back again to that communal gathering around listening to each other and coming up with what makes up that community of excellence, and really rallying around what that community of excellence would look like, and then speaking up for it, and again taking that vision and laying it on a legislator's desk and saying, this is what the community you represent wants out of its community.
And I think that to get broad buy-in, we need to change the context of the conversation. And we need to categorically let the broader community know what we on the front lines are needing to have to support the work that we do. And so we need to sufficiently educate them in terms of what this community is really about and what it really looks like. I'll go back to a study that was done by the Washington Post and Yale University about 5-6 years ago. And what they did is they did a survey on white Americans. And what they asked is that, what is your perception of Blacks in America? And interestingly, that survey said that most whites who took that survey said that they thought that the playing field was level, that African Americans had the same opportunities as they did. That survey went on to say that most of the people who took that survey went on to say that most whites thought that, in essence, people of color chose to be less educated. They chose to be poor. They chose to be disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. And so in essence, what they talked about was, or the conclusion was that the reason why we have these disparities is by choice. And so it gets back to my point on why we need to change the narrative. The change the narrative is that, no, that is not the case. No one grows up and says, I want to be poor. No one grows up and say, I want to be less educated. No one grows up and says that, I want to be incarcerated. And so I think that we need to let the broader community know what statistically is the reality. And if we can change that narrative, if we can start changing the mindset, if you will, that we have some very serious issues in our community that not only impact homelessness, but impacts equality across the board. I think that would be incumbent in terms of what we're needing to do to really have an honest discussion and dialogue on what the reality is for different people of different races in Charleston, South Carolina.
So ripping off the blinders and having honest education about what's really in our community, and then we can have the discussion about where we want to see the change, but we have to see the shortfalls first.
If you don't, you're never going to get to it.
Right.
If you don't have the honest dialogue, if you don't have the honest discussion, if you don't understand that there are people in our community who have different access to opportunity simply because of the color of their skin, I think we missed the point. However, you know, the fact of the matter is that, you know, it exists. It's not going to go away. And unless we are committed to making change, unless we're committed to going at it in a different way with a different mindset, as they say, if you do what you've always done, you will get what you've always gotten. And I hope that we collectively, as good people with the spirit that we have in doing the work that we do, I hope that that would be different, you know, for us.
Well, as you Otha, as you go about this hard work but very good work, what gives you hope in the midst of all this?
What gives me hope is that before let me just add this. There are people of color in our community who have done well. There are people across America of color who have done well. And as a Black man, I can say that I've had some bad things happen to me, but I've had a lot of great and good things happen to me. And what I would like to say for people of color who have done well, I know that a lot of them, regardless of how well they've done, that they ask themselves, how much more would they have done if they were white? Okay. You know, that's just, you know, an unfortunate commentary. And to preference it, we need to understand, you know, and you know, I'll make it as simple as I possibly can. You're asking people to run. You're asking people to run a race of a mile, but you've got the other team who got a half-mile head start. So, and so that's very simplistic and very simple terms, but that's the reality. But it's not so much of what I hope, but it's my vision. I would ask us to imagine how great our community would be if all things were equal. If everyone had the same opportunity to get jobs, to keep a roof over their head, to take care of their children, to put food on the table, and to make contribution to this economy and to this community. Imagine, if you will, how great our community could be. And I think that should be our aspiration. I think that should become what we aspire to do, because I think that if we do that, then we will truly realize our true potential as a city, as a community, and as a country. And so it's not my hope. It's my vision.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, because it sounds to me that what that says is, until everyone has the best shot possible to share the best of themselves, we're gonna miss out so much on the best that people have to offer.
Absolutely. I mean, there are people who in our community who are talented. They have so much to offer. They have so much to contribute, but they can't because they're in a disparate situation. And we need to do all that we can to make their dreams and their reality just as valuable and viable as everybody else's. And I think that if we can do that, wow, I think we will be truly amazed, and we can feel really, really good about that.
Yeah. That's a vision we should run towards as quick as possible, honestly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Ah. Man. Well, I thank you so much for coming and sharing tonight. And we could probably do like 12 more of these. More
I don't think the folks on the call could stand 12 more of me. But
there's so much wisdom you could gift us with, Otha.
But I'm just passionate about people. One of the misperceptions that we have about the Urban League is that the Urban League is only for Black people. No, we don't do programs here just for Black people. We have great programs here for anybody who wants to buy a home, for anybody who needs a help, anybody who needs financial literacy, or to learn about building assets. So getting a job, it's about being able to work more collectively and being able to say, well, listen, the Urban League doesn't have what you have, what you need, rather, excuse me, but you can go to Organization B and get that. You can go to Organization C and get that. And so for me, it's always been about collaboration. And let's move out of our silos a little bit. Let's pick up the phones a lot more. Let's have social distancing coffee. If we but my charge to anybody that's on the call is that let's be different. Let's try to go at it a different way, and see what we can do to really make systemic changes in our community.
Yeah, get connected and lift each other up.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we need it more now than ever. Absolutely.
Well, I think at this point we have crossed over into the time that I believe Chris had for some Q&A, if that's a possibility.
I'll open it up to again, if anyone has questions to throw them into the chat box. I definitely have a few questions. And again, thank you so much, Otha, for your wisdom. I always appreciate what you have to say. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is, you talk about the consistency and the disparities that exist in communities that you've worked in over the tenure of your career, and how we need to move towards this strategy of excellence, which breaks us out of a cycle of, taking a similar route or similar approach time and time again. But then when you, and trying to land this, and again, I don't think that our community is by any means unique in this regard, at least in my experience. When we're limited in our resources, again, I think oftentimes that breeds that siloed approach that you're talking about. And I'm just wondering if you had any sort of insights or thoughts over the course of your career as to how we build better collaboration and build better connectivity to work towards breaking out of that cycle, to building that strategy of excellence when, again, our resources often direct us into, again, a place where we sort of just stay in our lane, so to speak.
Chris, if I had the 100% best answer for that, I probably wouldn't be on this call, right? But I do have a couple suggestions. One of the things that we have to do most importantly is that we have to talk. Okay, we have to communicate. We have to understand or feel comfortable with, what we are wanting to do collectively as service providers. The other thing that I think that we have to do is once we develop that strategy or that agenda, that vision, if you will, we need to look beyond the borders of not only this city, but the borders of this state for resources to do the kind of work that needs to be done. And so I just, right now, I don't see it, within the borders of the state of South Carolina. So I think we need to look, wide and broad at where those resources are, so that we can look at how it is that we go about bringing them here to do the work that we want to do, or the things that we want to get on, or apply them to the things that we want to get done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I guess further to that, I mean, resources aside, even, when we look towards sort of building a stronger collaborative model, not even among service providers, but within our communities themselves, like, are there any strategies in your career that you could point to that you found to be sort of effective in building that capacity to collaborate?
Well, I think that one of the things that we did effectively in the cities that I've worked in previously was that we were able to create an inventory or repository, if you will, of what kind of services were available. And what we were able to do, we were able to effectively come up with a system of referral. One of the, we talked earlier, in the conversation about, the complexity of navigating through social service systems. What we have a tendency to do, if it is that we don't create that system of referral, is that we lose people. We'll hand them off to, or refer them to organization A or B or C, whatever, and something happens where it is that there's a disconnect, or the person falls off, falls out of the loop, if you will. And what I think that we could do, or what I recommend that we do, is that we look at potentially how we strengthen that system of referral, so that we can make sure that those persons are getting to those agencies and organizations that provide the resources that they're needing. Just go back in the conversation a little earlier. I talked about we need to have a holistic approach. You can't address homelessness if it is that you've got a person who doesn't have a good employment. You can't address homelessness if it is that you have family stresses. So it requires us to maybe strengthen our case management models so that we can do the appropriate assessments, and based on those assessments, have that system of referral in place so that we are comfortable that the clients that we're serving are getting to those organizations, and they are being able to access those points of service, and really take advantage and avail themselves of addressing their households beyond their presented situation. And so that's something that I recommend that we look at, and maybe nothing needs to change, but I think it's worth examining how well we do that.
Yeah, and that would be my question, perhaps the $1 million question, is what makes a good referral?
What makes a good referral is I think that when it is that if you refer someone to organization B, and you check with organization B, a day or two later, and you say, well, hey, did Otha Meadows come over there, and what happened, and there's this follow-up. I think that that's really reflective of a good referral. If you can really report that a client that you've referred has taken advantage of an additional resource, and I think it's an even greater referral if they've been referred to another resource and they can build on the resources that they've gotten, from point A to C, if you will, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that, referrals in general, again, any community I've lived in could stand to use some work. I mean, in my experience, I think one of the things that, people might not understand or appreciate is just how like taxing homelessness can be on like the mind and body, and the barriers that can come along with that when, again, you don't have necessarily a safe and comfortable place to put your head each night, and are moving around and not getting a good night's sleep, and the wear and tear that can take on a person, and how that can pose challenges to, again, reaching out to agencies. So even if we provide somebody with, hey, like here's agency XYZ that you should contact, is like, how capable is that person in that moment to actually pick up that phone and navigate those systems that you talk about to make that connection.
Well, one of the questions that that was asked of me, Chris, was to what's your definition of homelessness? And my definition of homelessness is a person who doesn't have shelter for 24 hours.
Right.
And I think that as a society, as a community, we need to be able to provide safe, affordable, and decent housing for each and every one, regardless of financial status, regardless of disability, regardless of familial status, regardless of race. Is that aspirational? Yes. But is it doable? Yes. And so, when you talk about the stress, and I think anyone on this call, any of the service providers who do this work can categorically tell you, not only can you see the stress on the clients who are coming through the door, but you can feel the stress. And I think that for anyone who doesn't really understand that, it's really difficult, to really put into words or put into perspective, because I think when we talk about homelessness or the things that contribute to homelessness, a lot of those things we take for granted. We take for granted that we're going to have food on the table. We take for granted that we're going to have money to put gas in the car. We take for granted that if we get sick, we can, that we're going to be able to get health care. And so, I think to put it in perspective for anyone out there who doesn't understand it, is take into account those things that we take for granted, and then think about what it would be like if you didn't have them. And then I think that would come up to maybe you having a better understanding of what folks are dealing with who are faced with homelessness.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think that unless you yourself have personally experienced homelessness, that you can never fully understand or appreciate, the impact that has on a person. And I think that if you haven't, you need to be sort of practice an awareness of the fact that I'm never going to fully understand and appreciate this, but I can recognize my lack of understanding, and that perhaps will lead me to more empathy.
Yeah. So in the referral process, it sounds too that what comes through is not just looking to a person to engage in the solution, but also evaluating as a service provider the person's capacity to engage in the solution. And if basic needs aren't met, that capacity can be low. But there are means of increasing that capacity to engage in a solution. And as service providers, we need to evaluate and keep that in our minds, and remind people when we're educating about engaging in working with those who are homeless.
Yeah.
We have to evaluate the capacity and also look for ways to increase capacity for engagement.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that lends itself to the conversation that we had earlier, is that, it's about being able to bank those resources. Example, okay, you come to the Urban League for rental assistance, but understand that the check in and of itself, most time, is not going to, holistically address your household situation. And so what, to your point, Pastor, we need to, as best as we possibly can, increase the capacity of people to take advantage of there are resources out there, but we need to increase the capacity of those individuals to really be motivated and empowered enough to go out and take advantage of them.
I got one last question for you. About changing the narrative, and when we're confronted with a society or communities that are often quite comfortable with the current narrative and resistant to changes to their narrative, what in your views or your experiences would you say are ways to navigate those waters?
Well, let me preference it this way, and I don't know if it answers your question specifically, Chris, or not.
Okay.
But if we don't address the disparities and the issues of those have-nots and those people who are living on the margins of our community and our society, we need to understand if we don't address those, they will continue to impact the whole community. Okay. And so it's incumbent that those people who are comfortable need to understand that until we address those disparities, the homelessness, it will continue to impact the community as a whole. It may not, necessarily impact their household per se, but if they have a sense of community, and if they have a sense of quality of life and health and well-being, they need to understand that as long as we continue to not address those concerns and the social and economic divisions that we have, it will continue to impact them, and they need to understand and realize that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this touches us all, whether we recognize it or not. Yeah.
They will. We're going to continue to pay taxes for programs and services for people in need. I mean, I can go down the list, but I think that you can easily lay out very categorically in terms of how we pay for those people who are less fortunate in our community.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much, Otha, for your time and your insights. Pastor Rebecca, for again your navigating us through. Again, this is hopefully the first of many. This will be recorded. So again, stay tuned or an eye out for this popping up online and for this conversation far and wide. We want to get this out to as many people as possible.
Yeah, man.
And carry this conversation forward.
Well, listen, I thank you both for taking the time and giving me the opportunity. Probably won't do another meeting tomorrow. Something happened to my laptop here.
Right.
but I just want to say thank you, Chris, for the work that you're doing. Pastor Rebecca, I know you're extremely busy all the time. But really, it's about not what we do individually; it's what we do together. And, I look forward to the opportunity to broaden our conversation, to broaden the work that needs to be done, to engage, to advocate, and to really bring focus in a very broad way to the work that we need to do to help the least fortunate in our community. And whatever needs to be done, let's roll up our sleeves and let's do it, and try to do it in a better in a broader way. Thank you both. Have a good night. Be well and be safe. God bless.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Mhm.